Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet type at Lincoln High School. She kept her head down, focused on her studies, and rarely caused any trouble. Her father worked long hours and traveled frequently for what he simply called government work, while her mother managed their modest suburban home. Sarah never questioned the details of her father's job. She assumed he was just another federal employee pushing papers in some boring office building. The trouble started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Sarah's best friend Emma convinced her to skip their last period study hall. Emma had been acting strange lately, hanging out with a rougher crowd and constantly checking her phone for mysterious messages. Sarah reluctantly agreed to leave campus, thinking they would just grab coffee at the nearby cafe and return before anyone noticed their absence. Instead, Emma led Sarah to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, where a group of older teenagers had gathered. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Sarah immediately felt uncomfortable as she recognized some faces from the local news, kids who had been arrested for vandalism and petty theft. Emma whispered that they were planning something big, something that would show the adults who's really in charge. Before Sarah could object or leave, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The group scattered like startled birds, but Sarah froze in panic. She had never been in trouble before and didn't know what to do. Emma grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a back exit, but it was too late. Police officers surrounded the building and bright flashlights cut through the dim warehouse. Within minutes, Sarah found herself pressed against a cold brick wall with her hands behind her back. The metal handcuffs felt impossibly heavy around her thin wrists. She tried to explain that she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the officers were focused on processing the scene. They had discovered evidence of planned vandalism, spray paint cans, stolen street signs, and detailed maps of government buildings marked with red X's. As Sarah sat in the back of the police car, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past the window, she felt her entire world crumbling around her. She thought about her parents' reaction when they learned about her arrest. Her father had always been strict about following rules and respecting authority. Her mother would be devastated. Sarah had worked so hard to maintain her perfect grades and clean record, and now everything seemed ruined because of one terrible decision to trust the wrong person. The juvenile detention center felt like a concrete maze of harsh fluorescent lights and echoing voices. Sarah sat on a narrow bench in the holding area, still wearing her school uniform and clutching her backpack. The other detained teenagers looked hardened and experienced, while Sarah felt like a lost child who had wandered into a nightmare. Detective Rodriguez approached with a folder thick with papers and photographs. He explained that the group Sarah was caught with had been planning coordinated attacks on several federal buildings downtown. The authorities had been tracking their activities for weeks through social media posts and intercepted communications. Sarah's presence at the scene made her an accessory to conspiracy charges, regardless of her claimed innocence. When Sarah was allowed her one phone call, she dialed her mother's number with shaking fingers. Her mother's voice cracked with emotion as Sarah tried to explain the situation through tears. Her mother promised to contact their family lawyer immediately and assured Sarah that her father was already on his way back from his business trip. Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Her father always knew how to fix things, even if she didn't understand exactly what his job entailed. The processing seemed to take forever. Sarah's fingerprints were taken. Photographs were snapped from multiple angles, and she was asked countless questions about her relationship with Emma and the other suspects. She answered honestly, explaining that she barely knew most of the group and had only been friends with Emma since the beginning of the school year. The detective seemed skeptical, taking detailed notes about every response. As evening approached, Sarah was moved to a small holding cell with two other girls. One was a repeat offender who bragged about her previous arrests, while the other sat silently in the corner, looking as scared and confused as Sarah felt. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, making it impossible to judge the passage of time. Sarah curled up on the thin mattress and tried to block out the constant noise of slamming doors and shouting voices echoing through the corridors. Around midnight, a guard approached the cell with an expression Sarah couldn't read. He called her name and motioned for her to gather her belongings. Sarah's heart raced as she wondered if this meant good news or if her situation was about to get worse. The guard led her through several security doors to a small conference room where her mother waited with red-rimmed eyes and a man in an expensive suit whom Sarah didn't recognize. The man in the expensive suit introduced himself as Attorney General Harrison, and Sarah noticed how the detention center staff seemed to treat him with unusual respect and deference. Her mother looked exhausted but relieved as she hugged Sarah tightly. Attorney Harrison explained that he was there as a personal favor to Sarah's father, though he didn't elaborate on their connection. Sarah assumed her father had called in some professional favor from his government work. Attorney Harrison reviewed Sarah's case with practiced efficiency, pointing out inconsistencies in the police report and questioning the evidence against her. He noted that Sarah had no prior criminal history, maintained excellent grades, and had character references from multiple teachers. The security footage from the warehouse was grainy and didn't clearly show Sarah participating in any planning, discussions, or handling any of the illegal materials found at the scene. Within hours, Harrison had negotiated Sarah's release on her own recognizance, with conditions that she maintain a curfew and report to a probation officer weekly. Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude toward the attorney, though she wondered how her family could afford such high-level legal representation. Her mother brushed off her questions, saying only that her father had connections from his years of government service. The drive home was quiet and tense. Sarah's mother explained that her father was dealing with a work crisis and couldn't leave Washington immediately, but that he was monitoring the situation closely. Sarah felt hurt that her father wasn't there when she needed him most, but she tried to understand that his job sometimes required him to prioritize national responsibilities over family matters. Back at school, news of Sarah's arrest spread quickly, through social media and whispered conversations in hallways. Some students avoided her completely, while others seemed fascinated by her sudden notoriety. Emma had also been released but was facing more serious charges due to her deeper involvement with the group's planning. Their friendship was effectively over, leaving Sarah feeling isolated and betrayed. The local newspaper picked up the story, publishing an article about the failed terrorist plot that included Sarah's name among the suspects. Sarah was horrified to see her school photograph printed alongside mugshots of known criminals. The article mentioned that all suspects were juveniles from prominent local families, but provided no specific details about their backgrounds. Sarah worried about how this publicity would affect her college applications and future opportunities. 3 weeks after her arrest, Sarah noticed strange activities around her house that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Black SUVs with tinted windows parked on her street at odd hours, and she occasionally spotted men in suits talking into small devices while pretending to read newspapers or walk dogs. Her mother dismissed these observations as paranoia, brought on by stress from the legal proceedings. Sarah's court-appointed probation officer, Mrs. Chen, seemed unusually well-informed about the case details and asked probing questions about Sarah's family background during their weekly meetings. Sarah found it odd that Mrs. Chen knew specific details about her father's work travel schedule and seemed particularly interested in any unusual phone calls or visitors to their home. Sarah began to suspect that her case was being treated differently than typical juvenile offenses. The media attention intensified when investigative reporters began digging deeper into the backgrounds of all the arrested teenagers. Sarah was disturbed to learn that 2 of the other suspects had parents working for defense contractors, while another's father was a federal judge. The conspiracy seemed to involve children from families connected to the government in various ways, though Sarah still didn't understand what made her family significant enough to warrant such scrutiny. Attorney Harrison continued to work aggressively on Sarah's case, filing motions to dismiss charges and challenging the validity of evidence. During one meeting, he mentioned that Sarah's father was following the case closely from his current assignment, and that certain parties were very interested in ensuring Sarah's name was cleared completely. Harrison's language was careful and vague, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers about her father's true role in government. The breakthrough came when federal investigators discovered that Emma and the other core conspirators had been manipulated by an adult handler who was using the teenagers as pawns in a larger scheme. The real target wasn't the government buildings themselves, but rather to create a scandal that would embarrass specific high-ranking officials by implicating their children in terrorist activities. Sarah realized she had been selected as a target, not randomly, but because of her father's position. Sarah's mother finally sat her down for a serious conversation about their family situation. With tears in her eyes, she explained that Sarah's father held a position that required absolute secrecy, and that their family had always been potential targets for people who wanted to harm him professionally. Sarah's mother had hoped to protect her daughter from this reality for as long as possible, but recent events made continued secrecy impossible. The truth about Sarah's father came as a shocking revelation that recontextualized her entire life. Robert Martinez served as the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, one of the most powerful and sensitive positions in the federal government. Sarah's mother explained that his frequent travels were actually trips to Camp David, foreign diplomatic missions, and high-level security briefings. The modest suburban house and middle-class lifestyle had been carefully maintained to protect their family's privacy and security. Sarah suddenly understood why Attorney Harrison had appeared so quickly and why the detention center staff had treated him with such deference. She realized that the black SUVs weren't random surveillance, but rather protective details ensuring her safety. The careful handling of her case and the media attention made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of her father's position. Even her school had been unknowingly selected because it wasn't the type of elite institution where the president's chief of staff would typically send his daughter. Within days of this revelation, the federal investigation moved swiftly to conclusion. The adult handler behind the conspiracy was identified as a foreign intelligence operative attempting to create political embarrassment for the current administration. Emma and several other teenagers were revealed to have been recruited through sophisticated psychological manipulation and false promises of money and excitement. Sarah's involvement had been orchestrated specifically to target her father. The charges against Sarah were formally dropped with a public statement from the prosecutor's office, acknowledging her status as a victim rather than a participant in the conspiracy. Attorney Harrison ensured that all records of her arrest were sealed and that her name was removed from any public documents related to the case. The school expunged any disciplinary actions from her record, and college admissions counselors were discreetly informed about the resolution. Sarah's father finally returned from Washington for a long overdue conversation about their family's unique circumstances. He appeared older and more tired than Sarah remembered, carrying the weight of national responsibilities that she was only beginning to understand. He apologized for the secrecy and explained that his position required sacrifice from the entire family, including Sarah's normal teenage experiences. The conversation was emotional and difficult as Sarah processed feelings of betrayal, confusion, and pride all at the same time. She struggled to reconcile the father who helped her with homework and attended school events with the man who advised the president on matters of national security. Her father explained that protecting Sarah's innocence and normalcy had been one of his highest priorities, but that recent events proved this approach was no longer sustainable. Life after the conspiracy's exposure required significant adjustments for Sarah and her family. The Secret Service conducted a comprehensive security assessment of their home, installing discreet but sophisticated protection systems and establishing protocols for Sarah's daily activities. She learned that agents had actually been watching her for years, just at a distance she never noticed. Sarah's return to school was carefully managed with the cooperation of administrators who were now fully aware of her family's circumstances. A cover story was developed explaining her temporary absence as a family emergency, and additional security measures were implemented on campus without drawing attention to Sarah specifically. Her classmates remained largely unaware of the dramatic changes in her life. The psychological impact of learning about her father's role and her own targeting was significant. Sarah began meeting with a counselor who specialized in working with families of high-ranking government officials. She learned that her experiences of feeling watched and her instincts about surveillance had been accurate all along. The counseling helped her process feelings of having been deceived by people she trusted most. Relationships with her parents evolved as the family adjusted to a new level of honesty and openness about their circumstances. Sarah's mother revealed that she had given up her own career aspirations to support her husband's government service, and maintain their family's security cover. Sarah gained new appreciation for the sacrifices both parents had made, while also asserting her right to be included in decisions that affected her life. The college application process took on new complexity as Sarah's counselors worked with federal security officials to ensure her applications wouldn't create vulnerabilities or reveal sensitive information about her family. Several elite universities were quietly informed about her circumstances and provided assurances about maintaining her privacy and security on campus. As graduation approached, Sarah reflected on how the traumatic experience had ultimately brought clarity to her life's direction. She decided to pursue studies in international relations and public policy, inspired by a new understanding of the important work her father did and the impact government service could have on people's lives. The girl who had once been naive about power and politics had been forced to grow up quickly, but she emerged stronger and more purposeful than before. Sarah realized that while she had been a victim of the conspiracy, she refused to remain a victim of circumstance, choosing instead to channel her experience into preparation for her own future service to her country.